And welcome, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of amazing food safety, food quality, fantastic products. Doesn't matter if you're eating them on the ocean, on the land, or in the air. It's awesome food, and we thank you for helping to make sure that it's safe. If you're new, welcome. This is the Food Safety Chat, and we go live every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, and we talk about a food safety topic. And talk, I think, is really key of what we do here on the chat and why we enjoy doing this so much, because this is not a lecture. This is not us dictating to you what you need to do. This is sharing of information, because as we all know, food safety, it's not a point of competition. It's not IP. It's something that we all share, and it's something that we all need to get better at every single week. And as a result of that, this is a very collaborative show. And as you'll notice, if you're new to the chat here, we'll have all kinds of engagement and interaction with the group. And definitely any questions you have as we're going here, put them in the chat and we will put them in here as well. And of course, I get to bring amazing people who actually attend the chat as well and bring them on here as well, such as Sonal Singh. How are you doing, Sonal?
Good morning.
So one of the things that we love to do when we start here in the chat, Sonal, as you know very well, is we put where in the world you're at. And I am in a very atypical kind of dreary, drizzly Colorado, Loveland, Colorado. It's kind of weird. So how's the weather where you're at?
It's pretty sunny, getting hot. I'm in Alpharetta, Georgia, so starting our summer, it's getting hot.
Nice, nice. So that's kind of in the Atlanta area, I think you had said?
Yep, north of Atlanta, yep.
North of Atlanta. Okay, yeah, I have my wife has an uncle who lives on the south side, Peachtree. I think that's beautiful, beautiful area down there. So anytime you go and visit, and we visited him a few years ago. Anytime you're in an area where they drive around on golf courts, it's a cool area. So it was always nice going to visit him. Chris, good morning. The Pacers, yes, nice. Humid North Carolina. I wonder if that's our friend Joe. Perhaps, can't see a name on there. Jordan giving you some moral support there. Thanks, Jordan. I'm sure Sonal appreciates that. Always really awesome. So one of the things that we always do on the chat here, one of the first things that we do is everybody, as you're filing in here, join Sonal and I for a drink of your favorite beverage. Cheers. It's the invisible cup. Look at that. Nice. I've got coffee. What are you drinking this morning?
I have some chai tea.
Nice, nice.
Spicy.
Which, as I understand from India, chai is Indian for tea.
Yep.
TT, which is kind of there is Joe in Clover, South Carolina. Always good when Joe is here. So one of the things that we love to do here on the chat is delve into new areas and new topics. And one of my guiding philosophies and all on this subject is that if you're listening to information, if you're going to a presentation or a lecture or anything, if you can just pull one new thing out of that, is a success. So as we're going through here today, and I know that you've got tons of information from that perspective today, is listen closely to what we're talking about here today and looking at how you can apply that to your processes, because improvement is incremental, right? It's not this, right? It's chunk. Things get better 1 or 2%, and you just keep building on that and improving your talent stack and adding new things in there that you can incorporate into what you do. Good morning, Michelle. Michelle, nice to see you. Sorry about that. So with that, of course, one of the things, Sonal, and you know this very well, that I love to do is torture everybody with the dad joke. Are you ready for the dad joke?
I'm ready.
Okay, well, so it's kind of a topical one here for what you do, in that I was doing some research looking for the dad joke, and I actually found that they're getting ready to start a new airline. Had you heard about this?
No, I haven't heard about it. Tell me about it.
Well, it's very interesting. So you have these niche airlines, so Spirit or things like this, where they're very low budget, but this one is catering to a particular group of people, and it's bald people. And the name really intrigued me. The name is it's Receding Airlines.
That's a good one.
So what's a good truth here in the food industry and food safety and everything that we do, Sonal, is that when we were talking about this a little bit before we went live, is that number one, right? We're all very interconnected, right? And so as you were laughing before, you worked for both me and Joe Golano here in the chat at one point or another. It's this interconnected web of people, and we all know each other, and we kind of move around and we change chairs and things like this. But keeping those contacts alive and building those relationships over time is, I think, one of the more valuable things about what we do, right?
Oh yeah, this is a very small community. So, we see each other and we learn from each other, and always great to keep those connections.
Yeah, because part of it is, and I think this is part of making sure that you have your ego in check in what we do, is number one, you can't know everything. But the important thing, and this becomes even more important the farther you go up in responsibility in an organization, is you have to know who to call if you have an issue. So for example, if I'm working with a client and there's a really, really touchy, sticky, hard to figure out environmental monitoring issue, I'm like, I bet Doug Marshall over at Eurofins knows a few things that I could probably take a look at. And picking up the phone and being able to talk to Dr. Marshall and get his help and insight and mentorship is gold, right? And having those relationships, super, super important. Alicia, good to see you. And part of the commonality, and this is why I think it's so cool having you on the chat here today, Sonal, is if you work in food safety, odds are you're doing what? You're traveling, right? It kind of gets back to our dad joke for today. We travel all the time. I know when I was VP of QA, I was hitting the 1K, right? So I was flying 100,000 miles a year. Odds are, within any given month, you're probably flying 75, 80% of that time going out and visiting what you need to do. And with that, one of the things with flying is if you have any flight of any length, right, you got one or two things. If it's a relatively short flight, the flight attendants are going down the aisle and they're giving you some snacks, some pretzels or whatever, and a drink and some water. And if it's a little longer flight, you're maybe going to get something a little more substantial to eat. They may offer some of those in-flight shelf-stable type products with dry products in it or treated products. If you're on an international flight, wow, you may get something hot, actually. I mean, it seems to be rarer and rarer as you fly here and domestically, but there's more of that internationally for sure. And part of that is, I think, with food safety, Sonal, and I'm sure you do this all the time too, is the food safety hat never comes off. Is you're sitting on the plane and you're looking at that food and you're going, should I eat that or not? I mean, so for example, one of the things that generally I will stay away from on airline food is cut fruit. So watermelon and cantaloupe, right? They'll have those little fruit dishes by the side of your main meal. And I'm like, I know enough about those, and that's a little too risky for me. I never buy those in the store. So I would never eat it on a plane, especially if you're going on vacation, right? You don't want to ruin your vacation. So you look at that really closely, and it doesn't stop there. It's airlines, it's restaurants, it's grocery stores. Everywhere you go, you're looking at these things, and it's automatic, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned cantaloupe, some airlines do have like a hazardous ingredient list, and they do not board items like that. So certain things like maybe like sushi or bone-in items, those things may not be allowed on board depending on the airline. And I work with the airlines too, and my company AMI to create different dishes and get them approved and work with our suppliers to create those dishes and things like that.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's really the topic. This is our whole chat here for today is food safety is assumed, but there's always a group of dedicated experts behind the scenes who are making sure that food is safe. So today we're kind of pulling back that curtain, and Sonal is going to explain to us for the airline industry and what she does in her role, how food safety is maintained. So what do you do? What is your role?
So I work for a company called AMI Group, and I've been with AMI for about 3 years now. We are a broker and solutions company for airlines, Amtrak, and cruises. So we have a sales team and a culinary team and a sourcing team that works with airlines to help them source dishes and create menus, and we do the wine logistics for a couple major airlines. So any type of wine that you probably have on board, it was distributed by my company. So yeah, and there's a lot of like social media groups like on Facebook and Instagram about airline food, and for me it's really cool to see, you know, certain products like maybe a dessert or crackers or snacks or entrees, and I recognize them and I know that my company has sourced that item. So we work closely with all the major airlines to ensure supplier and product information are on file. With certain airlines, they rely on us to do the supplier approval process, and then some other airlines have a more rigorous food safety requirement standard, and they would do supplier audits on high risk items before approval. So if they do a supplier audit, I also attend the audit to facilitate like any corrective actions, to get them closed out and approved to be onboarded. And also we work with our suppliers for regulatory things like the new traceability rule or the new allergen FDA guidance that was just put into place. So yeah, it's like a very broad, all-encompassing thing that airlines are involved in, and it's a very intricate supply chain too, because we have suppliers, manufacturers, we have catering kitchens, we have warehouses and distributors, all to get that product on board.
Wow. Yeah. So you're no different than any other food manufacturing company, right? You've got all these different moving parts that you need to maintain to make sure that that finished product, that food sitting on that tray in front of somebody on an airline or wherever they are, that food is safe. And that's huge. And the thing that really struck me with this as we were prepping for this call, Sonal, is a lot of times when you're dealing with, let's say, a traditional type food manufacturing operation where you're shipping it off and it goes to a retailer, you know, a Costco or what have you, the supply chain is relatively well known and pretty set time wise. But for you guys, it's just like you're going all the way to the end user, and that speed of getting that product from supply to a finished product where someone is consuming it is tiny. That's really short.
Yeah, so considerations have to be taken when the food is put onto the cart. Sometimes if you're in a smaller aircraft, there are no refrigeration component or spaces. So the carts have to be boarded with dry ice. For shorter flights, maybe only ambient snacks are boarded. But for international larger flights, of course, they have the refrigerated compartments, and they also have ovens on board. So, you know, your hot meal is heated in an oven to 350 or so for 20 minutes. But when you're on board, you know, things could happen. There could be turbulence. So maybe, you know, your product could get cooked longer than it wanted to, things like that. And something really critical on board is that the packaging has to be ovenable if it's going into the oven, because when you're 30,000 feet in the air, you don't want to have things burning or creating smoke, because that could create a very big safety hazard. You don't want that flight to get diverted. That's a huge cost. So we work with our suppliers on that to make sure that they're testing their packaging. It's not going to burn on board, things like that.
Oh, and so we've got a question here already. Awesome. Is after onboarding training, how often do catering kitchen employees and flight attendants get training on food safety? Wow, good question.
So I don't work for an airline, but I do hear about refresher training and onboard training. And actually, May 31st was International Flight Attendant Appreciation Day. So I know a lot of the major airlines do special events for their flight attendants, because while we're up in the air, they're like responsible for our safety and everything. So yeah, so, you know, you've seen on flights, they don't wear things like hairnets or, you know, things like that. But certain things are plated. Like if you're in first class or business class, the components could be separate and then plated on board. So of course they're trained to take the protective equipment or measures in place to not contaminate those items. So if there are complaints, like if there is a hair found in an item or a foreign object, or if somebody thinks they got sick on what they ate on board, I work with our suppliers to respond to those complaints. And we do get a lot of complaints a year. Like last year, it was over 200 complaints across all of our customers and across all of our products that we sourced that were boarded. So it keeps us busy responding to all these complaints. But it's interesting because, like say it's an item that the passenger has to open themselves, then that's the issue is definitely from the supplier, right? If you find a foreign object and it's sealed, then it's definitely from the supplier. But then if it's not, it could have happened on board, or it could have happened at the catering kitchen. And so airlines are aware of that, and they do their investigation both with the supplier and the catering kitchen.
Got it. So in your role, and we'll dive into these a little bit more. So for suppliers, you're dealing with how many suppliers did you say you were dealing with?
We have probably over 200 suppliers.
Wow.
And my team is a small team. So, we prioritize the higher risk items, or, usually it's like an entree or a ready to eat item that we prioritize to try to do their supplier approval and get their tech spec on file and all that documentation stuff.
Oh, so Ryan's got a good question for you here. So I'll keep the questions coming, guys. These are awesome. In-flight coffee machines. And I've heard this too. Maybe you know about this, Sonal, maybe you don't, but I've heard that the brewed coffee on board and things like that, you never drink that coffee because they don't clean those machines ever on the airlines. And so did the crews have SOPs to follow, asking as a coffee addict? Now this may be outside of your area of expertise, but what have you heard on that for like SOPs for in-flight training and things like that? You'd mentioned it a little bit before, but what else do you know?
Yeah, again, I'm not on the airline side, but I have read some things about the water supply. But I do know that USDA, once it's on board, USDA does have oversight, and they are monitoring. I've had reports of product sampled, and they share the results that they got. So if something is maybe like say out of spec for staphylococcus or something like that, they will make a report of it, and the supplier will have to respond. So I know there is oversight, and somebody is monitoring all this for us.
Well, I knew with as much as we travel in food safety that this would be a super interesting topic, and the questions are flying here. So Michelle had a question here. Class 1 recalls. So if there's something that's recalled that gets in a meal, how does that mechanism work? So I would think it would kind of flow through your process just like anything else, is you would be notified of an ingredient that has a recall, and then you would trace that through, right?
Exactly. And we are working with an organization called IFSA, the International Flight Services Association, to become compliant with the new traceability rule. So I have not been involved in a recall, but I have been involved in the airline deciding to withdraw a product that because it wasn't performing well quality wise. There was one entree where the sauce became too liquidy on board, and so it just wasn't performing quality and from a quality perspective. So that product was just taken off the menu. We do get reports of passengers thinking that they got sick off what they ate on board. And, if a supplier makes, let's say, 40,000 units, and we have one report of somebody that ate that, the likelihood that it's from that item is pretty low, but our suppliers do finished product testing. There's some airlines that have requirements about that. There's one airline that you have to test every lot. So in the event that there's a foodborne illness report, that you have that COA to provide and show that your product was tested and it wasn't the fault of the supplier and things like that.
So this is a good point. So you had provided a flow chart to kind of give everybody a picture and just kind of look at the complexity of the supply chain here. So why don't you kind of walk us through this and all and give us some highlights?
Yeah, so the products could come either from a supplier, like a manufacturer. They could be making entrees or snacks, or it could be co-packed into a box or a kit. And so a co-packer could be handling those items there. It could go through a warehouse distributor where all the products go to one warehouse and then get distributed across the country to the catering kitchens. So then each airport, if they have a catering kitchen, could be opening components and creating a meal, like, opening a chicken breast and pairing it with a rice that is being cooked at the catering kitchen and things like that. So it's opening the components or cooking the entire dish at the catering kitchen. And then the catering kitchen or the commissary could be loading the carts. And then another step is getting that cart to the aircraft. And, like with delays or, flight changes, all that has to be coordinated, and the products have to be kept at the right temperatures and so forth.
Wow. Super complex. And so kind of the way I'm thinking about this in terms of this flow chart too, is and you'd referenced this earlier as well, is kind of different levels of risk as you're looking at these different products with their different complexities. So kind of the baseline would be the snacks. They're in, controlled containers. It's a bag of peanuts. It's a bag of pretzels. It's a can of soda. Those are distributed and managed through a normal food supply chain. But the farther you go up in complexity, all the way, as you had mentioned earlier, to the fancy first class in-flight meal where they're putting gravy on the steak and the fancy desserts that you see on these YouTube channels that I watch with these fancy international flights, all of these levels of complexity. Yeah. So question I was thinking about here, and Joe, we'll get to your question here too, is if I'm a new supplier and I want to get one of my products, let's say that I'm making like a granola bar, and I wanted to start pitching that and getting that on flights for an airline, would that run through you, or would I contact Delta and try to sell it to them and then they would tell you? How does that flow work?
Yeah, so the airlines have a menu planning team and they have a procurement team, and my company also has a sourcing and culinary design team. So my team, they go to expos and shows, like I think IDBBA was just this past week. And so, that's a avenue where suppliers can get in front of brokers or airlines. IFSA also has an expo every year. This year it's in Long Beach, California in September. And that's another area where suppliers can get in front of airlines because they're all going to be at that show. But yeah, the menu planning teams, they work together to agree on prices, and, things like the size has to be considered because on board it's limited space, right? So the smaller it is, the more that you can get on board. And also there's like height requirements to fit in the cart and on the tray. So all that has to be considered. So yeah, they work together, the procurement teams and menu planning teams, to create their menu. And they do like cycles, because some people fly a lot and they get menu fatigue. They're like, oh, I ate this last week when I flew, so they're cognizant of that and work to rotate their menus so that their passengers are happy. If they're paying a lot for their flights, they want to keep their passengers happy and not get menu fatigue.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is an extremely complex supply chain. And Joe asked a good question here, Sonal, which is, where does your company's responsibility begin and end for food safety? Is it just kind of interwoven into everything, or are there other companies that are responsible more for other things?
Yeah. So if my company has bought the product, as in the airline's eyes, it's our product. Even if we use a supplier or a co-packer to create that product, it is our responsibility. Other placements are commission-based, where the supplier is responsible for that product. Either way, my company works with the suppliers if there's an issue to resolve that issue. There was one issue that happened last year that was pretty critical. So it was a dessert. It was like a cake. And on board, a passenger found some blue plastic in the cake. And it turned out that the supplier had these mixing paddles that were not metal detectable, and one of the paddles broke. So, of course, that lot of product was discarded. And then we worked with the supplier with a corrective action. So they switched over to metal detectable paddles. So that's just an example of something that did occur and that we worked with the supplier to get corrected. And it was a pretty good cake. And people liked it. So it was unfortunate that happened, but it's a learning experience for everybody, and we move forward from that.
It's one of the things I harp on quite a bit with my locals group when we're looking at recalls is non-detectable materials are pretty much the majority of foreign material related items. It's like, oh no, I have a metal detector, I'm fine. Yeah, no, you're not, right? So in those examples, I see that all the time in the dairy industry, is those Teflon scrapers that are going around inside of a vessel. You need to be checking those things all the time to make sure that they're intact. That's a really good example here. Michelle was also asking about ice and water testing. Interesting. So I don't know if that would apply to your side. This seems more like an airline type thing. How's that handled?
Yeah. So any water or ices that the airline is creating or providing, would be the airline's responsibility. But we do source bottled water. We have some bottled water suppliers, and water is tested very rigorously. So especially here in the United States, I remember doing audits for the Water Association, and that water is tested daily for E. coli and coliforms. So yes, I do look at those COAs, if not just water, any other product that we source. We do ask for COAs on file, and for certain airlines, they do require testing of every lot. So we do review those COAs for every lot.
Right. So, so your supply chain is, it's the same as any other supply chain going all the way to the restaurant, except for you have the increased responsibility and complexity of air, being in the air, right? And trying to manage that too. Oh, it just drives crazy. So you're dealing with suppliers and managing all these suppliers and dealing with the complaints, and within your company as well too, right? You're managing all of the quality systems and everything you have in place too, right?
Yeah. So we do import some products, and so we are responsible to have a foreign supplier verification program, and we were audited this past year and last year. So yes, we do have to have our quality systems in place. We have a customer complaint program, we have our FSVP program, we have a supplier approval process, and so forth.
Yep. Well, and like Michelle is saying here too, right? Everybody's got their part, and we see this in standard food safety practices as well. Is if you're selling product and it's going to the supply chain, and the retailer is putting your product in a coffin case or something at the retail side, where it's not keeping the refrigeration temperature correctly and it's spoiling the product and you have a lot of damage. The supply chain, everybody has a piece in the supply chain, and working together with these groups is extremely important. And all these different questions and everything that we're seeing here, all these things need to be addressed, but everybody's got their own little piece. And I think that's part of the problem. And this is what we're seeing. We'll talk about this a little bit more later on as we're talking here as well. This is why everybody is having such a difficult time with enhanced traceability. Is this diagram, I really like this diagram. I'm going to make this available within the database for the food safety chat, is that this shows just how complex everything is and all the different players who have responsibility. And as this chart here shows too, Sonal, there's things in here that impact food safety that you have zero control over. So local distribution. So if the airline decides that they want to buy something locally and try it out, you may not even know about it. And that could have an impact on allergens or who knows what. What type of silverware are they using on the planes, right? If you're in first class, you get nice fancy silverware. I was on a plane recently where they were trying out wooden silverware. It sucked. It was awful. I couldn't cut it. It was like, I give up, right? And I'm sure a lot of people gave up too. Managing all these pieces, and this is, I think, a really good illustration of what we're trying to do with this process, is instead of going forwards with traceability, which everybody's pretty comfortable with, it's going backwards, isn't it? And that's the hard part.
Yeah, so this diagram was created by IFSA. So I'm on a IFSA committee, the Government Affairs and Education Committee, specifically working on the traceability rule compliance. And so this diagram was created and presented to the FDA at our last committee meeting in DC. And because, when there's a regulation, the FDA just expects you to be able to become in compliance. So this diagram was trying to show the FDA it's more complex than you think, and this process or system doesn't fit in a restaurant model, or it doesn't fit in a retail model. There's different parts to it, and it's part restaurant and it's part retail. So what accommodations or what can we do to become compliant in the rule? So IFSA does a great job of keeping that communication open with the FDA. They have, I want to say, quarterly meetings to talk about things like this, or temperature requirements is a big one too, because the FDA does audit the catering kitchens. And I think everybody's goal is to be in compliance, but some things just don't fit in certain models so we use this diagram to show the FDA and meet as a committee to look at all the steps and figure out how we can move forward to become in compliance with the traceability rule.
Yeah, that's an important point, because part of this, number one is FDA pushed back the deadline, and I saw a significant drop off in activity relative to, okay, we got time again. No, we don't. We need to be working on this. And part of your supply chain are things that FDA exempted for other supply chains. So that makes it really difficult for you. It's like, oh no, this doesn't apply to us. No, it kind of does.
I was just at the Food Safety Summit in Chicago, and the Dairy Association was talking about working on trying to get their cottage cheese exempted. And I thought that was so interesting, because they have all this data and they're working on a report to share with the FDA. So, certain things, if the history and data show that it's not that high risk, I think that's great that the FDA is engaging with them for that conversation to potentially remove things off the list.
Right. Well, and it kind of gets back to Michelle's comment here as well, is it's dependent on everybody in the supply chain. If you have flight attendants on the airline who don't understand food safety and were trained in proper management, I don't care what the food is, right? There's very few exceptions. You can take that cottage cheese and set it out on the counter in that airplane, and it can go bad, right? It's you can damage almost everything if you're creative enough. So yeesh, that's not good for sure. So definitely a very, very complex supply chain for sure. So within that, so just to kind of reiterate on the chart here, so the main players in this, so we've got airlines, we've got caterers, we've got co-packers, assemblers, the food service groups, and this is kind of where we start seeing it as, customers of the airline, it's the Sky Chef truck or whoever that's backed up to the airline and they're packing those carts onto the plane. Brokers and distributors who are in the center of all these things, the suppliers and the trade groups, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, eight major players within this. And I didn't even mention those outside groups that can do one-offs where they could put things on flights for promotional purposes or things that you have absolutely no knowledge of. I'm getting a headache.
There's so many, not just Sky Chefs, there's Gate Group, there's New Rest, Flying Food Group, and probably others that I don't know about, but they're all involved in that IFSA committee. So IFSA, we met already once this year in DC, and we're going to meet again in the expo in California, and we have our monthly calls. And so they do a great job of connecting all these players, and so that we're all aligned and we're working towards the same goal, which is safe food.
So when you're thinking about this, and then I think this is a really good thought exercise relative to how we think about food safety as professionals, is so you're thinking about this, and you mentioned this earlier as well, Sonal, is different risk categories of, super high risk to low risk. And thinking about, okay, so for example, that bag of pretzels, it's self-contained, it's not opened, it's not handled, it's put in a food kit, it may be served in an individual bag to the person on the airline seat. Relatively low risk. We still need to manage them, right? We need to make sure they're not doing allergen contamination and that they've got all the things that they need to be a food safety manufacturer. But then the complexity just goes up from there, right? How would you rank how you look at food safety for your different suppliers?
Yeah, so for that example about the pretzel, we definitely want to have the facility information on file, their audits, their tech spec that shows the product, the label, the case label, the lot code format. Lot code format is something we're really keyed in with our suppliers because, everybody has a different lot code format. So we need to understand what the lot code format is if there is a report or an incident. To even make sure that it is their product, like it could be somebody else's pretzel, it could, right? To be able to identify the product. My company, if we are using co-packers or suppliers to make entrees for us, we usually go there for first production. I was just there at a supplier earlier this week watching a first production. So we get involved in those kinds of ways. Again, entrees, ready to eat items, those are the higher risk items. We don't get a lot of complaints for snack like pretzels, but then snacks like cheese or bread. The big thing there is mold. When I first got hired to AMI, we had a huge mold issue that there were so many reports of mold, and we worked with the airline and the catering kitchen to really stress that the cheese, once it's defrosted, it cannot be refrozen because everybody knows that's going to create mold. And after that first year, the complaints of mold in cheese drastically went down. And that was because of all the players communicating, the catering kitchen, the supplier, my company, all communicating and monitoring this to see what was the issue. And so we rarely get cheese complaints now. But when I first hired, it was so many cheese complaints.
So for the more complex things, how is traceability managed with that? So is there a math? So if I have, let's say, we'll think in terms of ways that we see it as consumers on airlines. So I've got a tray of whatever they threw in front of me. Okay, hi, Mr. Armentrout, would you like the chicken or the fish today? I'm going to try the chicken, right? And they put the dish in front of me and I peel back the foil. I've got the chicken in there. I've got potatoes. I've got something else, let's say some gravy in there with it. And on the side, they gave me a roll, and I've got a little desserty type thing and a drink. Is there like a master lot code for all those things that go on the plane, or are they just tracked individually from all those different? How does that work?
So the catering kitchen has to track what they are boarding. The catering kitchen could make that meal, or they could be using a meal that another supplier produced and just putting it on the cart. So either way, they have to trace the lot code of the supplier, or they have to trace all the components they use to create that meal.
Okay.
Usually,
so the catering guy there in the middle.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, those guys are responsible for tracking that.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So, what about specialty meals? So you see those as well. So, I'm a vegan, I need a special meal, or halal, or kosher Passover, things like this. Does the catering kitchen handle those the same way?
They do, and it's really hard program to manage because you may not get so many orders for a particular type of meal, and so they have to manage all that inventory. So my company does produce a solution for the airlines. We do create special meals, and there's so many. Like you said, there's low fat, low sodium, diabetic, gluten, vegetarian, and so forth. So we work with a dietitian to ensure that the entire meal fits those dietary restrictions or medical requirements. And we offer the kit as a solution to airlines. So this helps the airlines increase their compliance, and it helps them reduce their inventory and make it easier for the catering kitchens to just pull that meal and it's ready to go. I was talking to my boss about this because she manages this special meal program. And we were talking about how, when you book your flight or maybe change your flight, like, oh, I got to the airport early. Can I get on a earlier flight? Passengers could expect the meal to follow them, just like their bags follow them. And that's really hard. Passengers have to pre-order their special meals about 24 hours before the flight so that the catering kitchen can be able to board that special meal, whether they're using the kit or whether they have to make it in-house. So that's an interesting thing. Like if you change your flight, you're not, guaranteed to get your special meal order necessarily.
So how far in advance, so you mentioned timing on that. That's a really good question. So this is kind of like planning a restaurant almost, right? How busy are we Friday night? Oh, we're at 100% capacity. Oh, we need to order a lot of food. So do the catering companies then work with the airlines to figure out, it's like, oh, okay, this weekend we're going to be super busy with everybody traveling for Mother's Day. We need X amount of food. And then that's how their orders are worked?
Yeah, so there is a forecast, and this forecast is communicated to suppliers so that they can plan their production. But as far as what's boarded, that fluctuates day to day, right? So that's why sometimes when you're on board, like you ask for the chicken and then they run out of chicken, and that's just how it goes, right? Everybody's just doing their best to make sure that there's food boarded, right?
Well, and what happens then too if they guess a lot of food and they don't need a lot of food? What happens with that extra food on the plane after you leave?
Well, as we know, like food cannot just be out or stored forever. So especially like on international flights, everything has to be destroyed. I believe the Homeland Security is over that. Once all the trash, everything has to be burned, so nothing can be reused for security purposes.
Ooh, what about, because one of the things that they really emphasize now on airlines is like, we're part of a recycling program, right? And then they separate everything when they're going back to the aisle. Does that then, if they have to destroy everything, does that include the waste, and does that actually make it back to the recycling stream?
Well, what I was speaking about was just about international flights. Everything has to be burned. Sustainability though is a big trend right now for airlines, to claim that they're sustainable or, environmental friendly, things like that. That's why you saw your wooden utensils. That's what people are trying out. And, another thing I saw was it oyster shell straws or something like that? So all these new ideas are things to be tried out.
Wow. And so Michelle's question here kind of fits into my next question as well, right? So food safety plans, hazard analysis for all these different type of things, it's been woven into our conversation here. But one of the questions I'd ask you as we're preparing for this chat is, who has jurisdiction? So I'm on an airplane and I'm on a United flight and I'm going from JFK to Heathrow. Which food safety, which country has jurisdiction over that? Is it the US or is it England?
Yeah, so like things about like allergen labeling, it would follow the originating location. So the US allergens would be listed on the food. Suppliers are willing to call out both. There's more allergens in Europe and Canada, things like celery and things like that. And suppliers are willing to call it out. But as far as like legality, it's going to follow the originating location. Like I said earlier, FDA does inspect the catering kitchens. And then once on board, USDA takes over. And not just about like food safety, they're monitoring for other things, like certain things that you can't bring on board for things like fresh fruit or berries, like for certain locations like Hawaii, you can't bring certain things from Hawaii for like pest and, crop reasons. Also, Homeland Security are inspecting the carts before they're boarded. So the carts have to be sealed. The seal numbers are recorded.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I see the little plastic rings on the, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And even wine is monitored. So wine can be tax paid or bonded, and then the inventories have to be kept separate for those reasons. And then inventory has to be calculated, what was used on board, and then what was the inventory when it landed. So it's a lot of things going on.
Wow. So one of the things I wanted to kind of clarify, because you touched on this, but with this complex supply chain is so there's the here, we'll pull the chart back up here again. So you've got the catering kitchens, and then you've got co-packers over here. What's the difference between a co-packer and a caterer?
So a co-packer could be assembling a kit or assembling those snack boxes that you're able to buy on board. Okay. The caterer is making meals. They're loading the carts. They have that wine inventory there that they're storing. Gotcha.
Okay. So then they're kind of operating almost like a portable restaurant. The caterers, they're preparing all these meals, putting them in the little foil lined sealed containers. And to your point, if they prepare a dish that you may have created a formula for, the airlines may have created a formula for, if the spaghetti sauce on the spaghetti is too wet and sloppy and people open it and it's going everywhere, right? That's a huge problem. They're part of the group at that. And so back to Michelle's point here relative to, your food safety plans and things like this. We know from a food safety standpoint, once you get to that level where you're getting close to usage, hopefully everything's okay and you don't have enough time for microbial growth to happen, hopefully, right? You're keeping things at the right temperature, and that's really going to be one of the main controls at that point. But to Joe's point too, is if you're mixing things, right? So now all of a sudden you've got a sauce with a high pH and you're putting it on something with a low pH and it's neutralizing each other. And now all of a sudden you've got something with a conductive growth media for bacteria and it's sitting there on a warm tray. And let's say you've got bacillus growing or bacillus cereus or something like this producing toxin. So is that the catering group that's kind of who's managing that?
So the catering, this product could actually get cooked multiple times. So it could be cooked at the supplier, or it could be cooked at the catering kitchen, and then it's going to be cooked again on board. So usually what airlines tell us when we're like developing these meals, the meals are cooked at 350 for about 20 minutes. So, when we do our tests in our kitchen and we check the temperature, it's well over 165. So it could go through multiple cooking steps. But yes, everybody's responsible for, like, as far as the catering and the supplier, everybody's responsible for keeping their food safety plans. They are audited. The supplier, whether it's GFSI or FDA or USDA regulated. And then again, the catering kitchen is FDA and health inspection. So everybody is regulated and monitored.
So, I mean, I saw a special on the history of food manufacturing, which there's some shows on like the History Channel, I think, which are absolutely fascinating if you get a chance to watch them. I was watching one of those on Birdseye and how frozen meals were first created. And you reminded me of that because that was an important part of what they learned with producing these frozen foods. It was they would only cook it to a certain point and then freeze it, because the rest of the cooking process had to finish it out so it would be at the correct consistency when it was ate. So if you cook your pasta all the way to completion, it's going to be mush once they recook it. So they had to take it to a certain level and then have them finish it out. So that is so complex to try and figure that out.
Some airlines have specific requirements that it has to be ready to eat, fully cooked, to be boarded. Others are okay with the item to be ready to cook. And that goes to the supplier facility. Like, do they have those separations or segregations in place to be able to claim fully cooked? Because, you know, if your raw and ready to eat side are not segregated, you don't have a fully cooked, ready to eat setup, right? So yeah, it is a lot of work to ensure certain requirements are met for those airlines that have more rigorous requirements. But then, you know, other airlines do allow food that is ready to cook on board.
Gotcha. Well, and so we had mentioned this a little bit earlier too, is these different levels of sophistication. You know, here's your bag of peanuts. I'd like a snack box, please. Here's my meal in the back of the plane where I open up the foil. Now, right, first class, right? It's the Grey Poupon section where Joe Lano travels up there, you know, in the fancy first class. And now you have these custom prepared dishes with, oh yes, I'll have the duck confit with the bourbon sauce and you know, all of these type of really sophisticated meals that they're serving in first class. How do they manage that?
Well, all these dishes go through like menu planning testing. We work with airlines to send samples. They test it at their corporate or kitchens. We go to suppliers for first production to make sure that the meals are going to perform the way that they're supposed to perform. Yeah, but you know, airlines do want to keep their menus competitive and give the passengers what they're paying for, you know, so like elevated menus are really important for those business and first class. We do have my company does have a culinary team, and we are hiring even more executive chefs now to be able to provide that service. And same thing on the airline side. You know, they want to be featured in magazines like, look at this great dish that we board, or even it goes to wines too, you know, like we're boarding this wine or we're boarding this seltzer beverage. It is very competitive.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, just go to YouTube, right? The videos where people fly on planes and they rate the service and the meals, and you can see everything. Right? It's front and center. So yeah, so I'll have to talk with you about this afterwards because Joe is loving the conversation here. I am too. This is a fantastic peek behind the curtain. Thank you very much, Sonal. Maybe we can continue this conversation. If you have contacts on the airline side of what they do on their side, that would be really fascinating as well too. So maybe we can make that happen.
Yeah, I have a weekly standing meeting with one of the airlines food safety departments. So we work very closely together. Like I said, if they go on audits to suppliers to qualify them, I go along too. We're going to a dessert supplier in England later this month. As far as part of their supplier approval process. So yeah, we could set that up.
Nice. That would be amazing. Because part of this, and this is one of our themes here with the chat all the times, is food safety is just assumed. And we don't do that in food safety because we're always keeping an eye on it. But consumers just expect it to happen. So you had mentioned earlier too, Sonal, that, you know, complaint rates, and you've had great success in some mold complaint processes. So good job on that. How do complaint rates compare in your estimation with these different segments in the supply chain with other elements within the food industry? Are they comparable levels? Are they better or are they worse?
Yeah, so I did spend a lot of years working in industry and then auditing as well. The top 3 complaints that we see are alleged foodborne illness, foreign material, and then packaging issues. So as far as I remember, those were pretty similar categories from when I was working in industry.
Well, yeah, I can't remember, and I think that's a testament to the work that you're doing. Is I don't remember a major issue with food safety for an airline.
They are very rare, but when they do occur, it is a big deal because flight diversion. I'm told that the cost for a diverted flight is astronomical, so that's why it's so critical that things have to be right. There's been, you know, recent news stories about, like, one time I saw a person got sick on board and the flight had to be diverted, or the food had mold and then the flight had to be diverted. And so we never want to be in that situation. And thankfully, those are few and far between.
Yep. It actually reminds me, and so this is for more of our younger generation, not old fogies like Joe and I, is there was a comedy movie in the late 70s called Airplane. Are you familiar with that, Sonal? You need to watch it. So it's a crazy Zucker Brothers slapstick comedy type thing. And it's a parody of a disaster movie. And what happens in the movie, and this is why I think it'll be an interest to the audience for our younger people if you haven't seen it, is so it's an airplane disaster movie, and what causes the disaster is food poisoning. There are two different meals that are served on the airplane, and the fish dish makes everybody sick, including the pilot. So they have a bad problem. I'll leave it at that. If you haven't seen Airplane, it is one of the funniest movies. But it's always kind of interesting, though, too. Generationally, so I'm a Gen Xer, is what we find funny. Younger generations are kind of like, that's not funny. So I'll be kind of curious to see if you think it's funny.
It's interesting you mentioned the pilot, because the pilot gets a separate meal. So to prevent that situation that you just described.
Yeah, and probably goes back to the Airplane movie. But yeah, some of the more famous one-liners that you hear on the internet come from Airplane. And Leslie Nielsen is one of the key players in the show. And at one point, he's talking to somebody, and they're talking about the situation, the food poisoning, what they're going to do. And the person goes, "Well, surely you can't be serious." And he goes, "I am serious, and don't call me Shirley." So it's got that dad humor element to it. So Joe is right. So we're at the 5-minute mark here, Sonal. So we'll kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level. Fascinating conversation. I love this. What are some of the highlights? What are the things that you'd like to leave people with here today?
Just that a lot of work is being done behind the scenes, and there are a lot of good organizations like IFSA and the airlines and all the players involved in that supply chain working hard towards, safe food on board for everyone. And, I've been working with AMI for 3 years, and it's just been very eye-opening, and every day is a different thing. So it keeps me on my toes, but it's been really interesting learning about this industry, and I'm happy to play my part in it.
And coming up tomorrow is what?
World Food Safety Day.
World Food Safety Day. And here's a link. I've got a link for World Food Safety Day for everybody. Don't forget to celebrate World Food Safety Day, where people like Sonal are making sure that it's a good one. And so there's a link to the World Food Safety Day page. I also put a link in there for the Airplane movie as well. So it's the Wikipedia, so you get a little bit of background on it. But you can rent it. I mean, so you can watch it on like Amazon or things like that, I'm sure. I'm gonna hold you to that, Sonal. I want you to see Airplane and then report back to me on what you thought of Airplane.
Oh, I will. I'll be looking for it.
It's kind of fun because there's all kinds of different stars and celebrities that are in that make like cameos and do different roles. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the famous basketball player from the Lakers, he's in it.
Great. I'm gonna let you know after I watch it.
Well, fantastic conversation, Sal. Thank you for this peek behind the curtain. I know that I feel a lot better with that food that's on the airlines, knowing that you're behind the scenes making sure it's safe. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It's a great chat.
Absolutely. So everybody, fantastic. For me, a sign of a really good conversation is the questions we're getting from our participants in the audience. And thank you, everybody. Amazing, really, really good questions. So with that, we're going to bring our chat to a close here for this week. And with that, enjoy your weekend. Maybe fly somewhere, have a little mini vacation over the weekend, and enjoy that entree on the plane, because now you know what's going on. Of course, we'll be back here next Friday at the same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, where we'll have our next food safety chat where we live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube. And we'll learn more about what's going on to make sure that your food is safe from experts that are out that are like Sonal, that are making sure things are good for you. But in the meantime, have a great time, enjoy yourself, and we'll do it all again next week. So thanks, everybody. Have a good one. Thanks, Sonal.
Bye. Thanks.